camera back? Can we have our camera back? What's it doing, doggy dog? It's recording. We're on record. Alright then. And we're back. We're back with the Founding Fathers. Now once again, to get into the swing of things, the measure was reasonable and salutary. The Bey had already declared war in form. His cruisers were out till it arrived at Gibraltar. Our commerce in the Mediterranean was blockaded, and that of the Atlantic in peril. The arrival of our squadron dispelled the danger. One of the Tripolitan cruisers had fallen in with and engaged in a schooner enterprise commanded by Lieutenant Sterret. S-T-E-R-R-E-T, baby. Sterret. Gotta protect commerce. Okay. The bravery exhilarated by our citizens on that element will, I trust, be a testimony to the world that it is not the want of the virtue that makes us seek their peace, but a conscientious desire to direct the energies of our nation to the multiplication of the human race, and not to its destruction. And not to its destruction. Unauthorized by the Constitution, without the sanction of Congress, to go beyond the line of defense, the vessel being disabled from committing further hostilities was liberated with its crew. The legislature will doubtless consider whether, by authorizing measures of offenses, I thought there were no fleas here in Vegas. My dog's over there friggin' going wild on himself, scratching. Okay, man. The legislature will doubtless consider whether, by authorizing measures of offense, also, they will place our force on an equal footing with that of its adversaries. I communicate all material information on this subject, that in the exercise of the important function confided by the Constitution to the legislature exclusively, their judgment may from itself on a knowledge and consideration of every circumstance of weight. I wish I could say that our situation with all the other Barbary states was entirely satisfactory. Discovering that some delays had taken place in the performance of certain articles stipulated by us, I thought it my duty, by immediate measures for fulfilling them, to vindicate to ourselves the right of considering the effect of departure from stipulation on their side. From the papers which will be laid before you, you will be enabled to judge whether our treaties are regarded by them as fixing at all the measure of their demands, or as guarded from the exercise of force our vessels within their power, and to consider how far it will be safe and expedient to leave our affairs with them in their present posture. I lay before you the result of the census lately taken by our inhabitants, to the conformity with which we are to reduce the ensuing rates of representation and taxation. Reduce. You will perceive that the increase of numbers during the last 10 years, proceeding with geometrical ratio, promises a duplication in little more than 22 years. We contemplate this rapid growth, and the prospects it holds up to us, not with the view to the injuries it may enable us to do to others in some future day, but to the settlement of the extensive country still remaining vacant within our limits, to the multiplications of men susceptible of happiness, educated in the love of order, habituated to self-government, and valuing its blessings above all place, above all price. It's better than the last one. But I kind of got interrupted. Girlfriend got hungry. Okay, anyway, other circumstances combined with the increase of numbers have produced an augmentation of revenue arising from consumption in a ratio far beyond that of the population alone. And though the change of foreign relations now taking place so desirably for the world may for a reason affect this branch of revenue, yet weighing all probabilities of expense as well as of income, there is reasonable ground of confidence that we may now safely dispense with all the internal taxes comprehending excises, stamps, sanctions, licenses, carriages, and refined sugars, to which the postage on newspapers may be added, to facilitate the progress of information, and that the remaining source of revenue will be sufficient to provide for the support of government, to pay the interest on the public debts, government to pay interest on public debts, and to discharge the principals in shorter periods than the laws or the general expectations had contemplated. War, indeed, and untoward events may change this prospect of things and call for expenses which the imposts could not meet, but sound principles will not justify our taxing the industry of our fellow citizens to accumulate treasure for wars to happen we know not when, and which might not perhaps happen but from the temptations offered by the treasure. These views, however, of reducing our burdens are formed on an expectation that a sensible and at the same time a salutary reduction may take place in our habitual expenditures. For this purpose, those of the civil government, the army, the navy, will need revisal. When we consider that this government is charged with the external and mutual relations only of these states, that the states themselves have principal care of our persons, our property, and our reputation, constituting the great field of human concerns, we may well doubt whether our organization is not too complicated, too expensive, whether offices and officers have not been multiplied unnecessarily and sometimes injurious to the service they were meant to promote. I will cause to be laid before you an essay toward a statement of those who, under public employment of various kinds, draw money from that treasury or from our citizens. Time has not permitted a perfect enumeration, the ramifications of office being too multiplied and remote to be completely traced in the first trial. Among those who are dependent on executive discretion, I have begun the reduction of what was deemed necessary. The expenses of diplomacy agency have been considerably diminished. The inspectors of internal revenue who found to obstruct the accountability of that institution have been discontinued. Several agencies created by executive authority, our salaries fixed by that also, have been suppressed, and should suggest the expediency of regulating that power by law, so as to subject its exercises to legislative inspection and sanction. Other reformations of the same kind will be pursued with that caution which is requisite in removing useless things, not to injure what is retained. But the great mass of the public offices is established by law, and therefore by law alone can be abolished, should the legislator think it expedient to pass this role in service and try all its parts by the test of public utility. They may be assured of every aid and light which executive information can yield. Consider the general tendency to multiply offices and dependencies, and to increase expense to the ultimate term of burden which the citizen can bear. Aye, sweetheart. It behooves us to avail ourselves of every occasion which presents itself for taking off the surcharge, that it never may be seen here after leaving to labor the smallest portion of its earnings on which it can subsist. Government.
Oh, sorry. I'm mixing up my
Yeah,
notes.
I could have taken care of that later.
Oh, I'm
Just
sorry.
section
Well, I
up.
had to mix it up. It gets sticky, like you said.
Okay.
Okay, send.
Thank you, sweetheart. Okay, see you guys later. See you later, Jenner. See you later, little one.
Will you come upstairs? Because she wants to stay down there.
Okay. Better stay down there. Considering the general tendency to multiply offices and dependencies, and to increase expense to the ultimate term of burden which the citizens can bear, it behooves us to avail ourselves of every occasion which presents itself for taking off this surcharge, that it may be seen here that after leaving to labor the smallest portion of its earnings on which it can subsist, government shall itself consume the residue of what it was instituted to guard. In our care, too, of the public contributions entrusted in our direction, it would be prudent to multiply barriers against their dissipation by appropriating specific sums to every specific person susceptible of definition, by disallowing all applications of money varying from the appropriation of object or transcending into an amount, by reducing the undefined field of contingencies, and thereby circumscribing discretionary powers over money, and by bringing back to a single department all accountabilities for money where the examination may be prompt, efficacious, and uniform. An account of the receipts and expenditures of the last year, as prepared by the Secretary of the Treasury, will as usual be laid before you. The success which has attended the late sales of the public lands shows that with attention there may be made an important source of receipt. Among the payments, those made in discharge of the principal and interest of the national debt will show that the public faith has been exactly maintained. To these will be added an estimate of appropriations necessary for the ensuing year. This last will of course be affected by such modifications of the system of expense as you shall think proper to adopt. A statement has been formed by the Secretary of War on mature consideration of all the posts and stations where garrisons will be expedient, and of the number of men requisite for each garrison. The whole amount is considerably short of the present military establishment. For the surplus, no particular use can be pointed out. For defense against invasion. Their number is as nothing, nor is it conceived needful or safe that a standing army should be kept up in a time of peace. For that purpose, uncertain we must ever be of that particular point in our circumstance or in our circumference where an enemy may choose to invade us. The only force which can be ready at every point and competent to oppose them is the body of neighboring citizens as formed into a militia. On these collected from the parts most convenient, in numbers proportioned to the invading foe, it is best to rely not only to meet the first attack, but if it threatens to be permanent, to maintain the defense until regulars may be engaged to relieve them. These considerations render it important that we should at every session continue to amend the defects which from time to time show themselves in the laws for regulating the militia until they are sufficiently perfect. nor should we now or at any time separate until we can say we have done everything for the militia which we could do were an enemy at our door. Were an enemy at our door. The provisions of military stores on hand will be laid before you, that you may judge of the additions still requisite, with respect to the extent to which our naval preparations should be carried. Some differences of opinion may be expected to appear, but just attention to the circumstances of every part of the Union will doubtless reconcile all. A small force will probably continue to be wanted for actual service in the Mediterranean. Whatever annual sum beyond that you may think proper to appropriate to naval preparations would perhaps be better employed in providing those articles which may be kept without waste or consumption, and be in readiness when any exigence calls them into use. Progress has been made, as will appear by papers now communicated, in providing materials for 74 gunships as directed by law. How far the authority given by the legislator for procuring and establishing sites for naval purposes has been perfectly understood and pursued in the execution admits of some doubt. A statement of the expenses already incurred on the subject shall be laid before you. I have in certain cases suspended or slackened these expenditures, that the legislator might determine whether so many guards are necessary to have been contemplated. The works at this place are among those permitted to go on, and 5 of the 7 frigates directed to be laid up have been brought and laid up here, where besides the safety of their position, they are under the eye of the executive administration as well as its agents, and where yourselves also will be guided by your own view in the legislative provisions respecting them which may from time to time be necessary. They are preserved in such condition as well the vessels as whatever belongs to them, as to be at all times ready for sea on a short warning. 2 others are to be laid up so soon as they shall have received the repairs requisite to put them also into sound condition. As a superintending officer will be necessary at each yard, his duties and emoluments hitherto fixed by the executive will be a more proper subject for legislation. A communication will also be made of our progress in the execution of law respecting the vessels directed to be sold. For fortifications of our harbors, more or less advanced, present considerations of great difficulty, while some of them are on a scale sufficiently proportioned to the advantages of their position, to the efficiency of their protection, and to the importance of the points within it. Others are so extensive, will cost so much in their first erection, so much in their maintenance, and require much of force to garrison them, as to make it questionable what is best now to be done. A statement of those commenced or projected, of the expenses already incurred, and estimates of the future costs, so far as can be foreseen, shall be laid before you, that you may be enabled to judge whether any attention is necessary in the laws respecting this subject. Agriculture, manufactures, commerce, navigation, the 4 pillars of our prosperity, are the most thriving when left most free to individual enterprise. Protection from casual embarrassments, however, may sometimes be reasonably interposed, or sometimes seasonably be interposed. If in the course of your observations or inquiries they should appear to need any aid within the limits of our constitutional powers, your sense of their importance is a sufficient assurance they will occupy your attention. We cannot indeed but all feel an anxious solicitude for the difficulties under which our carrying trade will soon be placed. How far can it be relieved otherwise than by time is a subject of important consideration. How far it can be relieved otherwise than by time is a subject of important consideration. The judiciary system of the United States, and especially that portion of it recently erected, will of course present itself to the contemplation of Congress, and that they may be able to judge of the proportion which the institution bears to the business it has to perform. I have caused to be procured from the several states, and now lay before Congress, an exact statement of all the causes decided since the first establishment of the courts, and of those which were depending when additional courts and judges were brought into their aid. And while on the judiciary organization, it will be worthy your consideration whether the protection of the inestimable, we can say that, inestimable institution of juries has been extended to all the cases involving the security of our persons and property, their impartial selection also being essential to their value. We ought further to consider whether that is sufficiently secured in those states where they are named by a marshal depending on executive will, or distinguished by the court, or by officers dependent on them. I cannot omit recommending a revisal of the laws on the subject of naturalization, considering the ordinary chances of human life. A denial of citizenship under a residence of 14 years is a denial to a great proportion of those who ask it, and control a policy pursued from their first settlement by many of these states, and still believed of consequence to their prosperity. And shall we refuse the happy fugitives from distress that hospitality which the savages of the wilderness extended to our fathers arriving in this land? Shall oppressed humanity find no asylum on this globe? The Constitution indeed has wisely provided that for admission to certain offices of important trust, a resident shall be required sufficiently to develop character and design. But might not the general character and capabilities of the citizen be safely communicated to everyone manifesting a bona fide purpose of embarking his life and fortunes permanently with us, with restrictions perhaps to guard against the fraudulent usurpation of our flag, an abuse which brings so much embarrassment and loss on the genuine citizen, and so much danger to the nation of being involved in war, that no endeavor should be spared to detect and suppress it. These fellow citizens are matters respecting the state of the nation, which I have thought of importance to be submitted to your consideration at this time. Some others of less moment, or not yet ready for communication, will be subject of separate messages. I am happy in this opportunity of communicating the arduous affairs of our government to the collected wisdom of the Union. Nothing shall be wanting on my part to inform, as far as in my power, the legislative judgment, nor to carry that judgment into faithful execution. The prudence and temperance of your discussions will promote within your own walls that conciliation which so much befriends national conclusion, and by its example will encourage among our constituents that progress of opinion which is tending to unite them in object and in will. That all should be satisfied with any one order of things is not to be expected, but I indulge the pleasing persuasion that the great body of our citizens will cordially concur in honest and disinterested efforts which have for their object to preserve the general and state governments in their constitutional form and equilibrium, to maintain peace abroad, and order and obedience to the laws at home, to establish principles and practices of administration favorable to the security of liberty and prosperity, and to reduce expenses to what is necessary for the useful purposes of government. Second annual message, December 15th, 1802. To the Senate House of Representatives of the United States, when we assemble together, fellow citizens, to consider the state of our beloved country, our just attentions are first drawn to those pleasing circumstances which mark the goodness of that being from whose favor they flow, and the large measures of thankfulness we owe to this bounty. Another year has come around and finds us still blessed with peace and friendship abroad, law, order, and religion at home, good affection and harmony with our Indian neighbor, our burdens lightened, yet our income sufficient for the public wants, and the produce of the year great beyond example. These fellow citizens are the circumstances under which we meet, and we remark with special satisfaction, to which under the smiles of Providence result from the skills, industry, and order of our citizens, managing their own affairs in their own way and for their own use, unembarrassed by too much regulations, unoppressed by fiscal exactions. On the restoration of peace in Europe, that portion of the general carrying trade which had fallen to our share during the war was abridged by the returning competition of belligerent powers. This was to be expected and was just. But in addition, we find in some parts of Europe monopolizing discriminations which in the form of duties tend effectively to prohibit the carrying thither our own produce in our own vessels. From existing amities and a spirit of justice, it is hoped that friendly discussion will produce a fair and adequate reciprocate, come back to ya. But should false calculations of interest defeat our hope, it rests with the legislator to decide whether they will meet inequalities abroad with countervailing inequalities at home, or provide for the evil in another way. It is with satisfaction I lay before you an act of the British Parliament anticipating this subject so far as to authorize the mutual abolition of the duties and countervailing duties permitted under the Treaty of 1794. It shows on their part a spirit of justice and friendly accommodation which it is our duty and our interest to cultivate with all nations. Whether this would produce a due equality in the navigation between the two countries is a subject for your consideration. Another circumstances which claims attention as directly affecting the very source of our navigation is the defect or the evasion of the law providing for the return of seamen, and particularly of those belonging to vessels sold abroad. Numbers of them discharged in foreign ports have been thrown on the hands of our councils, who, to rescue them from the dangers into which their distresses might plunge them, and save them to their country, have found it necessary in some cases to return them at the public charge. The cession of the Spanish province of Louisiana to France, which took place in the course of the late war, will, if carried into effect, make a change in the aspect of our foreign relations, which will doubtless have a just weight in any deliberation of the legislator connected with that subject. There was reason not long since to apprehend that the warfare in which we were engaged with Tripoli might be taken up by some others of the Barbary powers. A reinforcement, therefore, was immediately ordered to the vessels already there. Subsequent information, however, has removed these apprehensions for the present. To secure our commerce in the sea with the smallest force competent, we have supposed it best to watch strictly the harbor of Tripoli. Still, however, the shallowness of their coasts and the want of the smaller vessels of our part has permitted some cruisers to escape unobserved, and to one of these, an American vessel, unfortunately fell a prey. The captain, one American seaman, the two others of color, remain prisoners of them unless exchanged under an agreement formally made with the Bashaw, to whom, on the faith of that, some of his captive subjects have been restored, trade in prisoners. The convention with the state of Georgia has been ratified by the legislature, and repurchase from the Greeks has been consequently made a part of the Tallahassee County. In this purchase has been also comprehended part of the lands within the fork of Okanee and Okamali,
Dear President Obama, we, the people, have stated resolutely we reject your vision for our country. You claim you have not heard us. We, the people, have assembled across America resisting your efforts to subvert our Constitution and undermine our liberty. You claim you have not seen us. Since you have not acknowledged our message, let us here present it once more. For if, as President Wilson said, a leader's ear must ring with the voices of the people, the time has come. Our greatest treasure is freedom, the absence of restraints on our ability to think and to act. The corollary of freedom is individual responsibility. We believe in the power of the individual. A few years ago, President Bush said, "History moves toward freedom because the desire for freedom is written in every human heart." Let us add that we will preserve it only as long as devotion to freedom is expressed in the heart of our actions. When President Lincoln dedicated Gettysburg National Cemetery, he declared, "It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so nobly advanced." That unfinished cause for which our soldiers willingly go to battle and for which so many have given their lives is a free United States of America. It has been nearly 150 years, and the work President Lincoln spoke of is not finished. In fact, that work will never be finished. Freedom is the capacity for self-determination. It is not an entity, but a condition, and conditions change. Freedom can expand, yet so can it contract. You promised change when you took office, Mr. President, but subjugation is not change we wanted or will accept. You have expanded government, violated our Constitution, confounded laws, seized private industry, destroyed jobs, perverted our economy, curtailed free speech, corrupted our currency, weakened our national security, and endangered our sovereignty. By compromising our nation's cultural, legal, and economic institutions, you are ensuring that our children will never achieve the same quality of life as we enjoy today. Through generational theft, you are robbing the unborn of opportunity. This is not acceptable, not in America. We did not become a strong nation through hope, but rather through self-reliance. No one better understands the relationship between individual achievement, dignity, and strength than our armed forces. Through every war, our soldiers have held this nation's destiny in their hands. They have not failed us. They cherish freedom enough that they are willing to die for it. Our duty to them and to ourselves is to treasure freedom enough to live up to it. We accept the challenge, Mr. President. That is why we are assembling across the land to deliver our message to you as often and in every way we can. Dismiss us at your political peril. Our great nation is a republic. We will not accept tyranny under any guise. Your policy to redistribute the fruits of our labor is statism and will not be tolerated. By our honor, Mr. President, we vow forever to resist coercive government in America. Patriots will not stand silent as you attempt to dismantle the greatest nation on earth. We, the people, will defend our liberty. We will protect our beloved country, and America's exceptionalism will prevail. God bless the United States of America. Sincerely, we, the people.
America, land of foreclosures. One after another. Substituting economy for taxation, and in pursuing what is useful for a nation placed as we are, rather than what is practicable by others under different circumstances. And whensoever we are destined to meet events which shall call forth all the energies of our countrymen, we have the firmest reliance on those energies and the comfort of leaving for calls like these the extraordinary resources of loans and internal taxes. In the meantime, by payments of the principal of our debt, we are liberating annually portions of the external taxes and forming from them a growing fund still further to lessen the necessity of reoccurring to extraordinary resources. The usual accounts of receipt and expenditures for the last year, with an estimate of the expenses of the ensuing one, will be laid before you by the Secretary of the Treasury. No change being deemed necessary in our military establishment, and an estimate of its expenses for the ensuing year on its present footing, as also of sums to be employed in its fortifications and other objects within that department, has been prepared by the Secretary of War, and will make a part of the general estimates which will be presented to you. Considering that our regular troops are employed for local purposes, and that the militia is our general reliance for great and sudden emergencies, you will doubtless think this institution worthy of a review, and give it those improvements of which you find it susceptible. Estimates for the Naval Department prepared by the Secretary of the Navy for another year will in like manner be communicated with the general estimates. A small force in the Mediterranean will still be necessary to restrain the Tripolitan cruisers, and the certain tenure of peace with some other of Barbary powers may eventually require that force to be augmented. The necessity of procuring some smaller vessels for that service will raise the estimate, but the difference in their maintenance will soon make it a measure of economy. Presuming it will be deemed expedient to expand annually a sum towards providing the naval defense which our situation may require, I cannot but recommend that the first appropriations for that purpose may go to the saving what we already possess. No cares, no intentions, no preserved vessels from rapid decay, which lie in water and exposed to the sun. These decays require great and constant repairs, and will consume, if counted, a great portion of that money destined to naval purposes. To avoid this waste of our resources, it is proposed to add to our Navy Yard here a dock, within which our vessels may be laid up dry and under cover from the sun. Now this makes me think back to when they were establishing the Navy to protect our commerce, not to go war with the rest of the world, but to protect our commerce, our trade, as we were trading here from America, and industry and such. Now I think of what they do, they blow up the ships, They're like, ah, it's old, blow it up, drop it to the bottom of the sea. That's the reason why the docks were set up, to bring those ships in and make repairs and not waste money. Let's blow this one up and rebuild a new one.